Hello, and welcome to the show. My name is Bret. This is my live stream here every week on Thursdays. If you are new to this broadcast, then you can check out a couple of links. So before we get started, let me break down what's going on. If you're watching this live, you can ask questions for myself and my guest. We're talking about containers, specifically Rancher, Kubernetes, Docker, all the Rancher Labs products. But that's what we talk about here: containers, DevOps, all that stuff. And I'm here every week live on Thursdays at this same time, except for last week. I did take a vacation last week, so if you were around last week, sorry, I wasn't here. I was in the mountains drinking wine. So if you want to support this show, I now have a Patreon, and thank you so much to those of you that are members. We now broke 100 supporting members last week. I was very excited about that, so thank you so much. You're the reason this show can keep going. And that my family is appreciating all the coffee you're buying us, essentially. So how this works with Patreon is I use this as a way for releasing everything that I'm doing. So all my open source content, all my open source testing tool, sample learning tools, all of my courses, all this stuff. If you're paying for the courses, that's different, right? You get the courses and their content. But in terms of the community and this live show and the podcast and the newsletter that I haven't sent in forever, that's how you can support that on this show. And you don't have to necessarily pay. If you just want to follow my updates and see just the things that I'm releasing, basically any new major open source stuff, any new courses I might be showing up, releasing, or any new podcasts or shows we're doing on the internet, you can just click the little follow button down here on their site. And you'll only get the emails that are, maybe at most 1 or 2 a week, that are just a quick little update on what I've just released. And if you want to give me a coffee a month and be a part of our membership program, that's great too. I appreciate all of you. And we just released our Discord server. So we currently, for the students that are in my courses, we have 35,000 students in Slack. And we've been doing that for over 3 years. But we now have a Discord server as well. So Slack and Discord are kind of the similar chat apps. So if you want to join our Discord server, you can also get exclusive channel benefits through Patreon membership. So if you go to devops.fan, you can sign up and join our DevOps server. Basically, we hanging out here and chatting all day. Slack's not going away. Slack is great for discussion as well. But what we're going to be doing here is have exclusive channels for not just patrons, but also for each course. So you'll have exclusive channels that are just private channels for each course and people talking about that course and asking questions there. But anyway. So let me invite to the show today's special guest that I'm excited to talk about. We have Darren Shepherd, who is the CTO and co-founder of Rancher Labs. Thank you so much for being here, Darren.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here again. Second time.
This is like our annual thing. In the fall, it's like the tradition now. Since we have you for the second time in 2 years, might as well say it as a tradition. So Darren has been on the show before, and we basically run through all of Rancher Labs projects and products, and it's a great rundown. Of course, being the co-founder and often the person who came up with the idea in the first place, Darren is a great person to talk to. So I'm glad to have you here. So the rules, people out there. Start asking the questions. We're going to get to those in a minute. I have some questions of my own that I need answers to that I'm hoping that Darren can shed some light on. You can also follow him, the little Twitter handles below us. You can find him on Twitter. He's constantly tweeting, and it's always good stuff. It's always good stuff. For instance, like you had one to
complain about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I like your honesty. You don't complain for the sake of complaining, though. You complain about legitimate things. You had a tweet today, actually, that I wanted to ask you about, because we're going to go random on the topics today.
Sure.
Aware of a Docker registry service that supports assigning a custom domain. I'm not sure what you meant by that, but it was an interesting question.
Yeah, well, no, because we're looking for where to host our images, because of the recent changes with Docker Hub and the limiting and whatnot, we're running into a significant problem because our users, our open source users, are all getting rate limited, and we haven't been able to find a decent solution. So we're looking at our options. So one of the things is we would like to have our own domain of Rancher registry or something like that. But if I go with like ECR ECR or GCR, can I do that? Basically, can I white label it? Because we don't want to run it run it ourselves. But what we're finding out is this is actually a really really tricky one. Is the amount of data that we're serving up in images today is absolutely ridiculous. We had no idea the amount of bandwidth that is coming out of Docker Hub today.
Yeah, because they haven't exposed that before. Yeah, they haven't given us those tools to see it. So you don't. You just know counts.
Yes. So we've been working with Docker directly and trying to figure out a solution of what makes sense. We have no problem with paying for anything,
right.
But just whatever solution makes sense. So we're that tweet was just because I'm legitimately looking for what are the best ways for people to run registries, and also where the bandwidth won't kill me, the cost.
Right. Well, it's a discussion that we've been continually having with the captains group too, because a lot of us support all of us got into be Docker captains because we were largely focused on open source, and Docker's original engine was open source, and that was the focus. And we were all very concerned as well about the announcements earlier this year, and we were confused by them as well. So I feel like Docker is trying to do the right thing, but obviously, like, it's a very expensive thing. So we all sympathize with them because it's like, this is super expensive. No, people aren't paying for it. But yeah, it's a tough. How do you satisfy all these needs of open source? It's a tough problem, I think.
Yeah, and like I totally understand what they're doing, and because it's like they've basically been giving away free storage and free bandwidth for quite a while now. We all kind of knew that had to end at some point. So we're in a kind of a little bit of a strange situation. I think our situation might be a little more unique because we are an open source project. So there's
you're not an official
it's
image,
a little harder.
But you're not an official image, but you're a big open source provider, and
so the amount of content and bandwidth we're pushing is really, really large, but we also don't have a specific like customer base. Well, I mean, we have our customers, but our users are 10 times, 100 times more than our customers.
Sure.
So it's hard to say like, well, everyone just use a Docker account, and so it's been kind of tricky.
Yeah, that's true. And for those of you listening and you're like, what are they talking about with this rate limiting stuff? So go back into, if you go to Docker Hub is putting in new rate limits and other limits to basically ease us into the idea that a lot of us are going to need to pay $5 a person or whatever for something, so that we're not doing unlimited hosting and unlimited storage and unlimited bandwidth. And their website and their blog, so if you just go to blog.docker.com, will actually have a bunch of those blog posts. If you're interested in this show, we've talked about it a lot. So if you go back and just search Docker Hub at Bret.live, that'll take you to YouTube, and then you can search on the previous shows. And we've probably had 3 or 4 shows just talking about this for like 50 minutes or something. So, but I was interested in that tweet because anyway, so random topic. Let's start off, before we get to the questions, let's start off with your main product, Rancher. And so Rancher Lab is a company. Rancher is one of the products. What is Rancher, and how is it different than Kubernetes? How does it relate to Kubernetes, I guess? Because people often ask me, like, Rancher versus Kubernetes, and that's like a weird question to me.
Yeah, so fundamentally what the product is I want to just clarify everything we do. Everything is completely open source. It's free to download. We don't even have it's like the open source bits are the same ones we give to our customers. So it's freely available. But so our main product that we have and sell support for is basically defined as a multi-cluster manager. So it's going to help you deploy and manage Kubernetes. And so what that Kubernetes is we're not very particular about what flavor of Kubernetes you get. That's kind of what differentiates Ranchers. We really view Kubernetes as a commodity. So if you're getting EKS or GKE or AKS, or you're running it, you wanted to set it up yourself through kubeadm, or you use one of our distributions, like RKE is our distribution for enterprise, K3S is our distribution for edge. So Rancher is going to help you basically deploy those deploy those distributions or manage them, do the security, set up GitOps, deploy applications. The way we kind of view it is like we want Rancher to kind of be your portal to the Kubernetes world. We're kind of the entry point. Like if you're just starting off today and you want to deploy a cluster, Rancher is really great. Spin up Rancher, makes it really easy to deploy a cluster and you can get running. If you're a large enterprise or you're more mature, Rancher will scale up to those use cases too.
Yeah, I like it. That's a really, you're well practiced at that. So, all right. So related to that, usually when I get someone that comes in and they're asking, okay, Rancher is this thing that I can use to deploy Kubernetes, and it's one of the ones I recommend to get started, especially because trying to do a Kubernetes vanilla, as we call it, for those out there that the Kubernetes ecosystem has lots of different distributions, and you can do just the pure open source upstream. But to me, that's a little bit like building your own Linux kernel. It's really only for the people that know what they're doing. And so in my courses, I talk about Rancher as one of the ways for deploying on a server, and it has sort of it makes a lot of these decisions for you and puts it together. But how is that? Sometimes when people are getting started, they hear something else called RKE. How is that Rancher different than that, or how are they related?
Yeah, so RKE is like our distribution of Kubernetes. And so RKE is going to be very similar to, any other distribution that somebody offers, like EKS or AK. So where RKE, because like the way we view it is, as I mentioned, is like we kind of view Kubernetes as a commodity. You can get it anywhere. So you should be really running the Kubernetes version that is the best for your environment. So if like you're in Amazon, EKS is probably going to be the best thing. But if you're on premise, you're running your own servers, then you need some option. You need an answer there, and that's kind of where RKE comes in. Is like we give you a distribution that's going to be good for data center on-prem, and then also very similar to that we have K3S, which is another distribution. So that it's just kind of one component in the bigger picture. It is not required. It's optional. A lot of people like RKE. We have a lot of people using it, but we kind of don't try to fight and say RKE is the best distribution ever, because it's like, well, no, like we just give you one because you need one, but if you get one some other way, that's fine. Like our goal is really to just help you manage Kubernetes and yeah.
Right. I like it. And you just recently had, back to the Rancher part, you just recently had the 2.5 release. And I got a lot of emails about that asking me to read stuff that I didn't read. So do you have a summary of what 2.5 did for us here in 2020?
Yeah. So 2.5 is kind of it was a major transition for us. It's kind of leading us into probably what will be like a 3.0 release. So there's a lot that actually changed under the hood, but it's really solidifying kind of this view or story that we've had in the company from the very beginning of like computing everywhere. It's like we really want to enable you to be able to deploy applications anywhere. It doesn't really matter where it is. You can have a consistent approach. If it's on-premise, cloud, edge, whatever. So our 2.5 release kind of strengthens our ability to, there's kind of like we have better integration now with K3S to so we're expanding into the edge. We have better integration with EKS, so you can manage the cloud, Amazon cloud better. But one of the major features that, I personally worked on that I really care a lot about is the integration of Fleet. And Fleet is our GitOps at scale solution. So this is a GitOps solution that will scale up to 1 million clusters. It really came out of our work in the edge space, but that's been directly integrated into Rancher. So now when you install Rancher, you have a built-in GitOps solution that works great for one cluster, works great for 100 clusters, also works great for 1 million.
Right. Fleet. So did that get released this year? That was a 2020 thing, right?
Yeah, it was a 2020 thing. So we announced the project earlier this year. I think it was around like maybe March or something. So we announced that, and when it first started, it actually had no direct integration with Git. Because I just gave a talk on this at Edge conference, this Edge conference we did yesterday with Microsoft and Amazon. I went into kind of great detail on the architecture and whatnot, because kind of the key thing about Fleet is the multi-cluster capabilities, is how to deploy to a lot of clusters and how to manage the configuration and how to do that at scale. And so Fleet is kind of like a very powerful multi-cluster management engine. And then you kind of layer Git on top of it, and then it becomes an excellent GitOps solution.
Cool.
But Fleet is actually, it's a project you can just use Fleet directly by itself. And then it's really nicely integrated into Rancher if you want a GUI, and it automatically, because you have to register clusters with Fleet, so all the clusters under management in Rancher automatically get registered with Fleet, so you can just add a Git repo and it starts deploying software through that. So you can use it by itself, but it's even better with Rancher.
Yeah, nice. And anytime we can, I mean, GitOps is starting to be a buzzword, a little bit like DevOps word. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, like, what do you define GitOps, or what does Fleet do in a GitOps way necessarily?
Yeah, because I mean, it is such a bit a buzzword or whatever, but it's like basically it's when I talk about GitOps, I'm specifically talking very much about the kind of the Kubernetes flow of like everything you define in Kubernetes is a manifest. It's a desired state. So like you just have to do kubectl apply, and then like that becomes something. So it's a very logical, simple thing of like, well, what if I just put those manifests in Git, and when I change it, when I update it in Git, you just automatically apply it to the cluster. So it's like GitOps with Kubernetes is like a no-brainer. It's like, oh, it's so simple. And that's why you see projects like Flux, which are really good. It's a very simple approach, and it worked really well. The complexities is just kind of how you start, how do you do this at scale, and but the basic concepts are so simple. And so like when I talk about GitOps, that's all I really kind of care about there. And like I don't even think, like, there's definitely a lot of problems with GitOps too. It's not like it's there's just never like a silver bullet for all these things. Right. But it has a lot of benefits now that it's like it's clear. I mean, I'll tell you, like, some of the downsides is, and these are things we try to fix with Fleet, is it's like as people scale up with GitOps, is like, well, they thought they would have all the centralized control and everything, but they ended up with like 1 million Git repos and different branches, and people are doing PRs, and they're just like, well, what the heck's going on? Like, what's the real state of my environment? Yeah. And that was one of the driving factors behind Fleet, where we're like, well, I can't just hook like every cluster directly to a Git repo, because I don't have enough centralized control and visibility, like especially in an enterprise. Like, how do I, what the heck's going on? So Fleet works as a kind of a centralized GitOps manager. So you can kind of go to one place and get visibility of everything, and then also control like RBAC and stuff if you're enterprise.
Right. So does that replace something like Argo or Flux?
Yeah. So it's like Flux is like fundamentally not multi-cluster. I mean, maybe the newer Flux stuff, they're doing a lot with GitOps Toolkit, and maybe some of that's moving towards multi-cluster, but like the Flux V1 was not multi-cluster. Argo is multi-cluster, and I know a lot of like our users and customers are very successful with it. Fleet plays in the same space, so it kind of overlaps with it, maybe competes with it to a certain degree. I don't like really to compete with other open source projects, but
sure. Yeah.
But it's like the architecture of Argo did not work for us to get to the scale we needed. Argo is a push model, and we know firsthand the complexities of that, because Rancher 2 is actually written as a push model, and that will currently scale to a couple thousand clusters. Whereas with Fleet, we needed to get to 1 million. So we had to flip to Fleet. The architecture of it is really what we say is like a 2-stage pull architecture. Yeah.
I never thought about that with Argo being push. I had Victor Farsik on 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. And our whole show was about Argo, CD, and GitOps. And so for those of you watching, again, Bret.live takes you to YouTube. You should go back in the videos a couple of weeks, and you'll see a guy named Victor. And we're talking about Argo. And so if you want to know, like, get more into GitOps, which is my favorite thing of 2020, is to GitOpsing all the things in Kubernetes. Sadly, for those of you that are Docker and Swarm fans, I don't I don't have any tools yet that anyone has really created that automate that,
Yeah.
although it wouldn't be terribly hard, but it I haven't seen it. So maybe you could be the one. Maybe you and the internet, you could be the one. Open source. Not necessarily Darren, because he's already probably got a list of 50 things that he needs to make open source projects because he's constantly coming up with new stuff. We talked about that last time, actually. If I remember the question where I was saying something like, what's your backlog of the list of things, like, all these things that you've said, I'm just going to make a little personal project, and then it becomes a product that everybody wants. And, it's like, what's the next one? What's on your list that you haven't yet told anyone about because you haven't had any time to work on any of these things?
I mean, there's things. I mean, because basically it's like, if you follow me on Twitter, I complain about everything. But like the way I kind of view is like, I don't like to just complain for complaining. It's like, it's like I legitimately want to solve the problems too. So if I'm complaining about something, it's most likely because I'm also working on it, or I'm using it and I'm trying to make it better. And so, I mean, I just have a massive backlog of ideas or things or whatever. The one thing that's been fun with Rancher as kind of scaled as a company. We're up to, I think we're like approaching 300 people. It's like 250 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's gotten big. I think we're getting better at, like, I can basically kind of prototype and come up with an idea and then hand it over to a team who can actually support it, because supporting, it's the maintenance of software that kills you. I mean, yeah. So
even just one project, like one project, there's people, how many projects, right, in open source on GitHub have thousands of users, and there's one person more or less with a couple of PRs.
Oh yeah. I know. And then it says like, oh, there's 300 contributors, and then you go to the insights tab and you go, oh, those were all doc commits,
right?
It's like there's only two guys working on this, or two.
Yeah,
people,
99.9% of all commits are from one person, then one commit per person for the other 299 people or whatever. Yeah,
that's the way it always is. Yeah,
I mean that's tough. I mean, open source is great, but also those of you that have ever made any out there, made any projects on open source, like, I'm sure you sympathize with us that you just be nice. Like, just the rule is be nice.
Yes, please.
Because the reason we haven't replied to your thing or fixed your thing isn't because we're ignoring you. It's because there's 1,000 other things that we're trying to also do, and it's
Well, I mean, it goes both ways too, because it's like, as when I first got into the industry, I was a Docker user. And so I was the really annoying Docker user complaining about everything. And then, we end up creating Rancher, and now we have a decent following or whatever. And so now I have users complaining at me. And so now, being in this position, I also realize it's like, as a maintainer or whatever, it's important to be nice, just give everyone the benefit of a doubt. It's like, it was just, there's no reason to get upset.
It's generally the rule on the internet, but especially in open source on GitHub, because and I think I wake up every morning, and because I myself have, with my courses, I've been lucky enough to get like 5 or 6 repos, some thousands of stars or something, and none of it's really that useful to people other than to learn, or to use tooling to learn different parts of Swarm and Kubernetes. And so luckily there's no production stuff in there, right? But I think I probably wake up every morning and think about that one repo that someone asked about yesterday that I haven't done anything with in 3 months, and that I should do something about it. So for those of you out there that have ever asked, we're probably thinking a lot more about your stuff than you realize. It's just a matter of managing all the incoming requests.
Yeah. There's a lot of great questions coming in. I'm saying.
I know. We got to get to some of these.
But
all right, so I'm just going to start doing some rapid fire for you. Biker 2010, who's around, I mean, like one of the most faithful YouTube fans for our channel over the last couple of years, asking about, they're moving. So I can tell you that I've seen his plight over the last year of moving from Swarm to Kubernetes and one of these things. He says, we're looking to move our Azure Docker Enterprise Swarm to either Docker Kubernetes, so Mirantis Kubernetes, or to AKS, but we want great monitoring and management. How would Rancher apply to either change?
Okay, Docker Kubernetes. With Mirantis?
I think he thinks of like Docker Enterprise as Mirantis or AKS. how would Rancher
I mean,
relate to that? Yeah.
yeah, so it's like if your strategy, if you're already going to like if you're in Azure and you're staying there, you're happy with that cloud or whatever, I'm always going to say go with the cloud distribution. You're by far going to get the best experience. It's going to be integrated the best with all their services and whatnot. So I would definitely say if you're in Azure, then AKS is going to be your best option. I'd still, check out Rancher to also manage it because we add a lot, of functionality kind of on top. But in terms of distributions, yeah, the cloud, you really can't beat, what AKS, EKS, GKE are doing.
Yeah. All right. But could Rancher manage the AKS? Is that how that
Yeah,
would?
and so where Rancher would add value to that is so we will help you manage all of your clusters. Because we partner a lot with Microsoft and have a lot of really successful customers and deployments with Microsoft customers on Azure. And so what Rancher is going to help you do is like come up with a strategy of how you manage multiple clusters, how you do authentication and authorization across those clusters. So let's say if what you can do is you can create an automation flow like GitOps or Terraform or whatever, which is then interacting with Rancher, which is then deploying the clusters. And then Rancher will add on top of it like monitoring also if you want to go with like more Prometheus oriented. I mean, Azure is going to give you their kind of integrated monitoring. But if you want to go with kind of Prometheus and that approach, which is quite nice because it's all container native and all that stuff. So it's like Rancher will help you with that. So, the way we look at it is like, kind of once you get the Kubernetes base in there, now you can just start dealing with kind of a pure Kubernetes world. And then Rancher is going to help you with that, so we can, hook up like the GitOps pipelines and things like that.
Okay. We got a question on, I don't even know how to pronounce this. I guess this is the question. Kyverno versus OPA. I've used neither one of these.
Wow. Yeah. Goodness.
Someone's got some skills out there. Someone knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, serious. Yeah, so I didn't even know how to say Kyverno. I'm going to go with that pronunciation. That's a great thing about open source. You never know how to say anything.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of actually Kyverno. OPA is it's kind of got the mind share or the original, like it was kind of like very quickly became like the de facto solution of like, oh, hey, OPA is the answer for everything. So OPA is nice because it's a policy engine that's going to work for anything. And then so you have Gatekeeper, which is going to be the Kubernetes specific integration. So if you're looking for a solution for enterprise or like for policy management or policy authoring and enforcement across anything, OPA is your way to go. If you're focused more on Kubernetes and you just care about Kubernetes, Kyverno is significantly easier to use. I very much like it. So it kind of just depends on your approach. Because like to me, the biggest downside of OPA is Rego. I don't know how you say it, but it's their policy language. It's derived from Datalog, which is derived from Prolog, so it's kind of a different way of viewing everything. It's more of a query language, a query and evaluating data. So it's a little hard to grasp at first. So I'm a big fan of Kyverno. I don't think at this point in the policy space, anybody should be making a large bet of just saying like, this is the only solution going. Yeah. So I honestly would say, we'll just start with Kyverno. And if that doesn't, if you need to extend past it, then try out.
That's the challenge with any of these tools, I think, right? Like in the container world, I think the only thing we've standardized on is that the Docker file is the Docker file. Like that's the image format is the image format. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the longest thing that's going to last out of all of this is going to be the OCI image spec. That's basically, yeah. That was a great question.
Yeah, I mean, and I know I have tried neither of those, so none of the. I mean, I've only dipped my toe into controllers, into mission control. So I'm always curious about other people's experiences, and so that's not to keep plugging that Discord chat, but there's a lot of smart people in there that keep asking questions, and they're like, Bret, what do you think of this? And I'm like, I don't have time for all the things. So maybe I need to have Darren more on the show to have these random Kubernetes questions. That's why I ask everybody's opinion on there. Like, what do you guys think? And I got to jump into Tucker Captain's room, which is always a great Slack to be in, because there's a lot of experience in that room as well, because they're mostly senior DevOpsy sysadmin people.
Yeah.
Personal Docker registry equals Nexus? Is that versus Nexus? I think
it's probably saying like that. That's a good option. I mean, Nexus is a decent option for the Docker registry. I'll say for our use case, I don't have as much experience with Nexus. I mean, I've seen a lot more like Artifactory, JFrog being deployed. That's probably the one I see the most if you're not going with a hosted, a cloud vendor or whatever.
Enterprise.
So our
right?
biggest,
that's paid, right? That's a paid.
Yeah, it's pricey, and our biggest thing is the running the operations of that at the scale that we need. I mean, we're pushing over a petabyte of data a month in terms of our image.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, starting in like 2017 when I started doing DockerCon talks about like production and like how to get to production faster, like project planning, basically. I would have these couple of slides on it, and that's like things you should outsource. Do not run your own registry if you can at any way avoid it. Like it's an HTTP storage system. It's boring. Like, why do you want someone constantly managing garbage collection of images and bandwidth problems and storage problems? Like, that's just
it's a REST API on top of S3. I mean, it's just another object storage. We just like called it, a different thing. So it's like, no, please don't run them yourself. They're if you can just get it as a service, that's much better.
How can we measure production grade Rancher K3s or keys or K3S or however anyone wants to?
Well, I mean, so the beauty of K3S is it is still just Kubernetes. I mean, it's like we did a lot to make it small and easy and whatnot, but it's still Kubernetes. So like how you're going to monitor and manage it is really no different than Kubernetes in general. And so because K3S has actually gotten so popular, we're now actually seeing first class support from it from like ecosystem partners or whatever. So it's like I think Sysdig now officially supports it, and so you can run all those same. Our web page is so light on content, but
lightweight Kubernetes and web page.
Yeah, well, it's like basically you just need those two lines there. It's like just run those and you'll get a Kubernetes cluster. But yeah, so I mean, it's Prometheus, Datadog, Sysdig, all the regular solutions is like basically how you want to monitor it. So if you hook up K3S to Rancher, you can deploy, Prometheus through Rancher, and then you get the normal monitoring there.
Yeah. Compliant, or what is it? Conformant.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a couple comments about the GitHub running the Docker registry, but to my knowledge, GitHub still requires auth on all of its registry stuff. And for a lot of this open source stuff, the challenge is doing it without auth.
There's a question here. How did you come up with the idea of replacing etcd with SQLite? It's a super technical one, but that's kind of a fun story.
Yeah, please. I've been watching a little bit of the drama as it unfolds.
Yeah, because this is so ever since so basically Rancher got into managing Kubernetes basically as soon as Kubernetes started getting users, and so our biggest hassle of managing Kubernetes has always been and still basically is etcd. Because it's a persistent system. So it's like not to harp too much. It's like etcd in the earlier days actually had some reliability and some issues or whatever. These days it's pretty rock solid. But it's fundamentally at the end of the day, it's a persistent system. And so from the very beginning, we always were like, well, why do I need etcd? Why can't I run on top of something else? Because I don't want to run, like our customers don't want to run a persistent system. Like they would much rather get it as a service. And so the motivation for swapping out etcd with something else was always that I'd like to be able to run it on RDS because I can just pay for RDS and I don't have to worry about operations. Or if I'm in an enterprise, I have a database team and they just do it for me, so I don't have to worry about it. So we actually started this work way. I mean, it was like 5 years ago. We did this. We had contracted Glider Labs to develop a prototype of replacing etcd with kind of doing the shim of getting etcd to run on top of a relational database. And we basically proved that the idea was feasible, but the timing wasn't quite right. So it was kind of this pet project of mine after that for many years, where I just kept hacking away at a database, like a database solution for Kubernetes. And so it wasn't until K3S came along where we then found kind of a perfect use case for it, because we could swap out etcd with SQLite, and then it made Kubernetes much more lightweight, less intensive on the disk, much better for edge solutions. And so that's kind of where it came from. It's like people actually don't realize really the amount of effort that went into creating that. And so that code is actually, it's in a project called Kine, which is a project that I really would like. It's part of K3S. K3S is a CNCF project now. So that project is kind of hosted with K3S in CNCF. But that project I would kind of like to see move upstream to be a Kubernetes project, because you can run Kubernetes on top of any database. And so I had mentioned Fleet. We talked a little bit about Fleet and how do you scale Fleet to a million clusters. The only way to do that is actually you have to run Kubernetes on top of a relational database, because the data store etcd just won't hold up.
Right.
So this is like a super technical component, something I worked on for many years. Actually, pretty darn proud of that it works. And I do see that as the cloud distributions like EKS and those things get more, as that becomes more of the commonplace, that all of the cloud vendors are basically going to move away from running etcd, because they're going to run different. It's just too costly to run etcd. So it's like you could run. We haven't actually done it yet, but it's theoretically possible to add a driver to Kine to support like DynamoDB, and then it would be ridiculously cheap to run Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was Maz's question. That's a really good one, and I'm gonna have to make a clip of that.
Yeah.
That'll be its own YouTube clip. etcd and SQLite, and all the sequels, talking about that. All right, so there's a conversation, and I actually didn't know this. Alex is, by the way, Alex, Virginia Beach, hello. We're down the street from each other. I think I saw him. He's saying Darren's argument against GitHub registry, and SFX Works pointed out that GitHub now recently allowed for public pulls to require no authentication, which I did not know. That's really cool.
So there are, so with the GitHub registry, I mean, actually, I think it's great. Like that's probably should be your default option. If you're, one of the kind of the leg up that GitHub has is that you're already controlling, teams and authentication and authorization and roles and all that stuff. And so integrating GitHub registry, I mean, your Docker registry into GitHub, I think is a great solution. I would by far recommend that for most people. It only just becomes more of a problem when you're like enterprise and you care about, where your data's stored and stuff like that. But whatever, it's Microsoft. They'll figure out some answer there too. So I have nothing actually against it. For our use case, like there's two requirements we were looking for is, can I put a custom domain on it? Which I don't think I can do. And even though it's unlimited use for open source projects, I think there's still actually a limit. I don't think the bandwidth that we're pushing will actually, but we're invested. That's one of the options on our plate. Because we still haven't really decided.
I'm sorry, you were saying you don't think even though GitHub claims unlimited bandwidth for open source, like if it was a petabyte, they might reach out.
Yeah, there's still a kind of like an abuse limit, So I don't think it's actually completely, unlimited. Because it's somewhat abusive, which I understand the amount of bandwidth that we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that some people, and myself even made this mistake probably years ago when I didn't quite understand the difference between containers as an artifact and that concept when I was first getting started. But there's a huge difference between source code storage and Git pulls and Git pushes and stuff like that, and container image registry storage and container pull. I mean, like images are many factors more in general of storage and bandwidth than code. So when people sometimes think that this is like people think this is like, why doesn't it just like GitHub allows all this for free? Why can't all this be free? And it's like, well, it's actually quite different to store store this stuff, and that's why all these companies like NPM had to go make an enterprise model, because like NPM as a free thing is quite expensive, I'm sure, but that's still just open source code. There's not a lot of compiled binaries in there, even though technically I think you can do it.
And that's why it makes sense for. It's like the only place I think right now you can actually get kind of free unlimited downloads is GitHub, but it's kind of like they have the scale of being Microsoft, and so they're kind of eating the costs in different ways. But they'll have to offset that somehow.
Yeah, and people are asking questions and talking about like auth and can everybody just auth, and I think that the question for me that the thing is it isn't that we all can't just auth to go do pulls of images. It's that until now none of us have had to for anything that was public. So any open source, none of us have had to npm auth or bundle auth or any of these other things for anything other than private repos, and it's a matter of just. Now everyone and every server and every CI solution and all this stuff all has to now deal with auth on a thing that we never had to deal with. I don't think it's a matter of no one can do it. It's just it's a new thing.
No, it's actually a significant problem, because that's introducing auth where people didn't have it before. It's like our customers have it's like if I have 1,000 clusters under management or whatever, it's like that's not a minor change.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's lots of chances for that to go wrong.
All
right, moving on from that. What are the container technologies? What are the container technologies supported by Rancher?
All of the above. I mean, Rancher, because it's like our products and projects and whatnot. We go down as low as we have like Rancher OS and K3 OS, which are our operating systems. So we're looking at the kernel level, K3S and RKE2. Somebody had actually a question about RKE2, but those are bundling in Containerd. So we're doing, kind of CRI, container runtime level. We have Longhorn, which is storage. Then Ranchers, fleets get, so it's like our projects, they kind of cover most of the space. And like the only thing we don't do directly is going to be like monitoring, logging, those type of things. We're just using like Prometheus or FluentBit, and but we still like support them. There's supported versions you can get through Rancher and whatnot. But as I kind of like introduced Rancher in the beginning, it's like we really would like to be kind of like your one-stop shop. It's like we are your kind of gateway into the Kubernetes ecosystem and then CNCF universe. So while we're not necessarily the one, you're not, every project is not a Rancher project, but you're going to kind of go through Rancher to get that.
Right. And all of these, maybe most of these are all focused around Kubernetes, right? Like the gravity of your products are all pulling.
Yes, we're very so like the when we announced Rancher 2.0, which I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, I can't remember the time, was like that was a very big shift in our company, and we went 100% in on Kubernetes. So before that, we were still supporting like Docker Swarm and Mesos and those solutions, but we went completely all in, and that's been a challenge for me personally, of like, because Kubernetes is definitely more difficult than, let's say, like what Swarm was doing, but that's kind of where things like K3S came from, was like our attempts at trying to make this easier for people. It's like the kind of running a K3S cluster is really no different than running a Swarm cluster these days. It's it's about that easy. Now deploying your apps on Kubernetes is still harder than, let's say, like Swarm, but we're, hopefully these things will get solved over time. So.
Yeah. I think that was one that Toaster Chicken asked. Great name. Now that Swarm is continuing support, will Rancher be getting Swarm support back?
No, absolutely no. We have zero interest in Swarm, unfortunately. We don't. I'm sure you have a good amount of Swarm fans in your audience, and I was always a fan of Swarm and the simplicity and what they did, but we don't really view it as strategic in any way. So I wasn't even quite sure. So I'm assuming that means that Mirantis said they're going to continue to support. Like who said they're supporting Swarm?
Yeah, Mirantis. Yeah. So
yeah.
And for those of you watching, if you're a Swarm fan or interested in Swarm, just go back. I'm going to say this 1,000 times today. Bret.live. Go back in the show list. And earlier this year, we had a whole Swarm show. We talked about 2020 updates, but essentially, Mirantis right out of the gate said we're going to give it 2 years of enterprise support because they bought 700 Docker enterprise customers essentially when they bought the majority of the company, and on as far as I know, close to 90% of those were all running Swarm as their primary container runtime. They could run or orchestrator. They also might have been running Kubernetes, but they were also running Swarm. So Swarm is most of their customers, and so Mirantis, I think, was doing that to sort of calm the fears, right, of the whole purchase and then customers bailing because they're worried. But since then, they have continually restated, oh no, we're adding now. We're going to add CSI support. We're going to add jobs. Jobs is already up in upstream Moby, but the release cycle and feature set is still very slow. Like it's not like there's a team of 20. As far as I know, it's still a person and a half. That's the developer team on Swarm. So it's not going to in any way catch up or ever be the thing that Kubernetes is, right? So
yeah, I mean, so the thing with Swarm is I don't. It's probably just not a good idea to continue. It's like with our customers, it was a painful transition to get them from. We had an orchestrator called Cattle that was in Rancher 1, which was very simple, and people were very successful for it. And the people who used it really, really liked it. And when we came out with Rancher 2, which was all Kubernetes, it was just nowhere near the same simplicity. And it was painful. It was like, it kind of made me sad of like, well, we delivered this thing that was so easy to use before, and now we've made Kubernetes easier to administrate, but using it is still hard. But I do honestly believe it's the right move for like our users, our customers of like, yeah, this stuff is a little harder to use, but the ecosystem is incredible around Kubernetes. Yeah. And it's just hard to deny that. And if you continue with Swarm, just make sure you have a good exit strategy, because there's no ecosystem there. So I think most I was just going to say, for the Kubernetes, if you really like, if you want a really simple solution of like, how do I just basically deploy applications, Rio plus K3s, Rio is a project from Ranch or whatever. Rio plus K3s is a super, super easy way to run containers in production. Rio is a layer that we add on top of it, which is going to give you like automatic certificates and load balancing and canary deployments. It will pull apps directly from Git. It does some auto scaling. So if you're really looking for that just very simple, almost closer to like a Heroku-like experience, but you're running it yourself, that's what Rio is.
It has a lot of it. I mean, so you would run, you could run Rio without Rancher and just run it on K3s directly?
Yeah, you just spin up, because it's just a Kubernetes project. So you can just launch K3s. K3s is really a no-brainer to run. And then run Rio on top of that. Rio is just a CLI. It will basically install and deploy itself, and you can hook up your apps from GitHub, and it will deploy and run applications, and they'll scale, and you get routing. There's a load balancing, and Rio is a pretty fun little project.
Yeah. My answer to students and a lot of my consulting clients, it's like, if you haven't made an orchestrator choice now, you probably should choose Kubernetes by default. when people go through my courses, the way that they're introduced to Docker and then Compose and then registry and like some things like that and Hub, and they go through those basics, and
Yeah.
then to wet their lips on what orchestration is, because it's already built into Docker, they learn Swarm a little bit, and there's a couple hours of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And then for a lot of people, they just stop there, and it's good enough for them, and that's great. I still actually run my own website on Swarm because it still works, and my website's just a website, and it has a couple of things. I think a Let's Encrypt proxy in front of it, or I'm sorry, a traffic proxy running Let's Encrypt in front of it, and then a storage driver from an old project that doesn't even exist anymore, really, for RexRay, I think. But that works for me, and I haven't changed it in like 3 years. So, but if I did it all again today, I would probably, like what you're suggesting, I would probably, if I needed to run 3 or 4 websites, and I had some nodes on DigitalOcean or something, and I just wanted to have a little hobby project, I might do K3S or Rio. Does Rio run on like top of? I mean, it requires a Kubernetes
Yeah,
API
any
endpoint,
Kubernetes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can
So
run
like
on
you could like
DigitalOcean or
yeah, if you run Rio on top of DigitalOcean, that's a pretty sweet setup. Because DigitalOcean is a no-brainer to spin up a cluster. Yeah. So I mean the biggest problem I see in the ecosystem right now is this gap between basically Docker Compose and Kubernetes. Is that there's just not a good path forward because Docker Compose is so good. It's like it just doesn't get enough credit for what it's done. And it's this great tool for people to understand containers and spin up environments and stuff, but there's like I know Docker has some solutions, but they really haven't been adopted much of running Compose in production because it's a super, super hard problem because this is a space I've worked with in a lot of like Compose is great for developers. It's not great for operations. It's not great for enterprise. So how do you bridge that gap? And this is something I've looked a lot at. Rio was our first attempt at trying to bridge that gap. I don't think we actually succeeded there. We are actively working on kind of a Rio 2 where we're trying to address this, this major gap that I think exists.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when it comes to like you go from 200 lines of Compose to 2,000 lines of manifest, and just to do essentially, well, that's the same thing. You get more bells and whistles, and you probably, you've got more stuff going on there. But yeah, like you throw in that ops responsibilities, and suddenly, you have all, thousands of lines or something instead of, and you've separated it from one big Compose file to small little nice manifests.
But it's the separation of concerns of like Compose gives you like, oh, I can assemble my application and it makes sense for the developer. But then how do you add all the production bits? Because like that's kind of what Kubernetes, like all those bells and whistles are all for production. And it's like a developer doesn't care about that at all. And they shouldn't. It's like it's a bunch of details that are just annoying.
Right.
And so it's like how do you keep that simplicity but then create like effectively an artifact that you can move forward? I mean, I really hope, next year when we do our annual talk, I'll be talking about how we've addressed this problem. This is something that bugs me a lot. I wish Kubernetes was easier to use.
Yeah, and it's definitely the next frontier, I think. And it also is challenging because it gets lost in the messaging of people are learning containers, learning Kubernetes, and then this is the kind of problem they have once they're ready to go production, and then they fall off this cliff of it's reasonably easy for a developer, and now suddenly, holy crap. And that cliff is a rough one. And we struggle the same way in the training world too, because we're trying to figure out how to train people on these things. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to teach you about this, but before you know this, you got to know this, and before you know this, you got to know this, and now you need to know 10 things just to get your app into production.
Yeah, and it's even more complicated in enterprise because what's happening is the IT team is like, okay, Kubernetes is the answer, so they come up with their Kubernetes strategy, and they're like, okay, now I have Kubernetes, and now I'm going to give it to my development team, and then it's like the development team is like, well, how do I use that? And then people end up building all these custom paths and layers on top of it. So it's like you have problems coming from both sides of like people start with Docker Compose and they understand containers. They don't know how to run it in production. And then in an enterprise, it's like, well, yeah, we already decided it's Kubernetes and now we're forcing that on you. And have fun with that, And so it's like Kubernetes, as much as like Longhorn wanted, sorry, I read a question. As much as Docker was all about the developer, it was like all about the developer, like empowering the developer. Kubernetes, unfortunately, is all about core IT. It's like that's why it's been so successful, is that enterprise has adopted it, and it's to a certain degree kind of I don't think it's been very good for the developer to a certain degree. Right. It's like kind of it's pushed the it put the ball back in IT's court, basically. Like they have all the control. Right. Whereas like the developers before were like, I want Docker and I'm so much more, agile with it, and they're pushing IT, and then they're like, wait, hold on, give me 2 years. Kubernetes, now you deal with it. So
I keep wishing. I mean, I'm a huge Compose fan, and every one of my consulting clients, I almost insist that we actually, like, that's the first part of the project, is we compose this thing. And it usually ends up with developer happiness, and then we start talking, and then it's a completely different conversation to talk about server clusters and Kubernetes and shifting the manifest. And the only thing I've been able to come up with is watching over and over again, multiple times a year with these projects, like seeing the ebb and flow of that, is like, if there was only something in Helm or whatever that basically the developer gives it its compose file, and it doesn't necessarily do a translation because we've got those converters, but it, like, basically, what if it takes that compose and then it applies like the commission controllers, the ingress, all the other things that so on top of it without changing it? It's like,
I'll tell you exactly the project that we're working on, because it's pretty much what you said, is that we kind of spun it out of Rio. It's something where it's called Dolly right now. It's kind of hard to find because it's in one of our developers repos, but is that we're specifically trying to do that, where it's like, what if I take a compose file and effectively turn it into a Helm chart? So it's like, I can do the live development. I can do Docker Compose up. I can, develop my application. I get all the cool flow of Docker Compose, basically. But then when it goes to deploy, I can basically turn that into a Helm chart. But turning it into a Helm chart, I also then need that layer that you're talking about of like, how do I inject my, production bits, and like, how do I add my Istio configuration and my OPA, it's like all the stuff that you need to be compliant for your organization or whatever.
Right.
And secrets, so that, so it's like how to, because that what we saw was that, like, with Rio specifically, is Rio has a runtime aspect to it, and the downside of Rio was, like, developers like Rio, it resonates with them, and they like it, but they can't convince the core IT, the people running Kubernetes, of like, you need to run the runtime of Rio, like, because they have to get like the operations team to buy into it. And then they're like, oh, well, what is this? Because Rio comes with a service mesh built into it. And so they're like, oh, it's Istio. And like, now they need to know Istio and all this other stuff, or it's Linkerd. It's Linkerd by default. I'm a big Linkerd fan. But yeah, so it's like, basically, it's like, how do you create from the developer side an interface the developers like, but that can turn into basically a standard artifact that then can be handed kind of over the wall to operations, as much as DevOps are supposed to be together, but like it is still kind of, and so it's like, how do you then create a standard artifact that can move forward? And then people who are like, I understand Kubernetes and I don't care about your developer world, they know how to deal with it. And so that's like the solutions like that we're looking at right now. So anyways.
Yeah. So Helm and some other bits to help with that.
Yeah, and Helm is one of my favorite projects to hate these days. But it's like, I love. Yeah, I mean, Helm is become like Fleet. If you look at Fleet internally, Fleet is actually built on top of Helm. Even though you don't have to author Helm charts, what we do is we actually, when we pick up the manifest from Git, we dynamically turn them into a chart and then use Helm to deploy them. So when you look at your cluster, everything is defined as a Helm release. So you have like good auditing, what everything is. There's a lot of advantages of putting things into a Helm chart. Like the downside of Helm, and what everyone always complains about, is the templating and authoring the charts. And then there's complexities around CRDs and whatnot, but those are all kind of misdirected anger.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? Like when you what you just mentioned, right? So like a developer learning Docker is one thing, and then learning the compose format, and then like, okay, cool. But then to get into production, if you're expecting that same developer or the team is to like, now you need to learn a manifest. Oh, now you need to learn Helm charting, or customize or whatever. And it's just it's exhausting a little bit. Like there's very few people that I know that can be a good developer and then also try to manage all these other things. So I think it's totally legitimate to say that let's keep those ops focused things in ops. And it's not that we can't share. And if this is all infrastructure as code, then everyone should be able to see this stuff. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a hard area that I think we're going to be seeing more and more people trying to deal with. And, hopefully, I mean, at some point it's going to have to be added to my courses, because as the community grows and my students mature, they're all having to deal with these issues too. And I'm gonna have to come up with something. And
Yeah.
that's been the problem too with Kubernetes. It's like you make a course, like people want me to make a service mesh course. I'm like, okay, which one? Like I can't do a service mesh course
Yeah.
on all of them, and I can't do a CI course on all the CIs. Like,
Well, the service mesh is just as complicated as Kubernetes if you're going to go with Istio. But yeah. So yeah. Oh, I totally lost my train of thought. Anyways, keep going.
oh, okay, that's okay. We'll come back to it. So I'm gonna do some rapid fire. See if we can't catch up on some of the questions. By the way, thank you so much. We got a little money from Niles, or Niels. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. €3. So fist bump right back at you. Thank you for that. I missed that earlier. That was like 10 minutes ago. Sorry I didn't see that in the chat. It's not popping up on my screen like it should. So thank you for that. The RKE2.
So RKE2, that's a savvy user who knows about RKE2, because that's not something we've in 2.5 we announced something called RKE Government. I think it's what it's called, but it's technically it's RKE2 kind of in preview, but we've tailored it specifically for the government sector who has like higher security requirements. But what RKE2 is the next version of RKE that will be coming out. Like it'll be more fully supported in our next version of Rancher, what would be like a 2.6. And it's really exciting because what we've done with RKE2 is we've revamped RKE on the same kind of, it's almost like the same platform as K3S. It acts and behaves a lot like K3S. It's just as simple to interact with as K3S, but instead of choosing a bunch of kind of lightweight embedded options that K3S does, RKE comes with kind of like your full enterprise grade fatness.
Right.
So it's going to like, be using like, it's like, it doesn't use any embedded components. Everything's ran separately. But it's super easy to get up and running. It's really easy to administer. Yeah. So it's like, so I'm really excited about that project. And so it's also, it's consolidating our approaches down to, it's like if it's going to be, basically RKE can run a cloud data center, that's where and then K3S is edge, but no matter where you run, we basically have the same approach. So it's like RKE2 and K3S are going to be the same approach in how you interact with it, but they have different capabilities in terms, more tailored to the environment where they're running.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is next level of Rancher Academy course coming. I enjoyed the L1 operator one. So while you talk about it, I'm actually going to bring that up because we didn't mention that, but Rancher does have this cool training somewhere. I just had, oh, there we go. I'll put this link in chat.
So the training I don't know when we launched this. I mean, it's relatively new. I think it's like maybe in the last 6 months. But it's been a huge success. I mean, a lot of people have signed up, have gone through this training, really enjoyed it. I really, it's kind of funny. So, when it comes to training, we said, hey, we're going to start doing like certification or whatever. And internally, I kind of like barfed on the idea. And because I'm not a big fan of like certification, but the reason why, the thing that's great about this is it's not so much about like the certification of getting a paper. Like, I don't think that proves anything. It's about learning the content or whatever, because somebody asked, this was like a Twitter, I think it was maybe there was on Twitter, we were discussing this of like, well, what's the value of like getting the CNCF certification for, Kubernetes? I think it's called CKA. Is that what it is?
Yep.
So and my answer was like, we actually have seen a lot of value in the certification for, it's your way to like, you've got a competent employee, smart person. They don't necessarily know a lot about Kubernetes, it's just a quick start for them to understand and learn everything about Kubernetes. And so that's what this is like, this is not about getting certified, like that paper means something or whatever. It's about teaching you the content. And so, you can have your people, your team members can just go through this, and so it's been very successful. So when is level 2 coming? I can't say direct, like I don't know. I know they're working on it, because it's been very successful. So they're going to be adding more content to that, but the exact schedule I don't know. But I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, David. And for those of you that haven't heard about this, so there's a link in the chat. So the way that this works, because this isn't Docker mastery, right? Those of you that are students. So this expects you to know Docker and Kubernetes first. So my recommendation is, if you're interested in Rancher, and I would definitely recommend that you check it out, because it's one of those things that you should know. If you're going to do Kubernetes, right, you probably need to learn a couple of distros at least, and this is definitely one of the ones I would recommend. So do the Docker mastery course from me, and then do the Kubernetes mastery course from me. So those will get you the fundamentals, and then you're going to learn a distribution. And this is I've checked it out. I've actually watched some of the videos, and I would recommend this. This is great. While we're there, look up Adrian's channel. Should have his link somewhere. Oh, I'm not signed in. That's why it's not finding. It's not finding it, because it's like, who are you? I'm showing you container ships. Oh, I'll find it later. I'll put it in the notes of the. Anyway, I don't know why he's not showing up on my YouTube. Let's go back to the questions. Longhorn CLI, another insider. When can we expect to see the Longhorn CLI?
Oh, that one So the direction of Longhorn has been, because there is technically a Longhorn CLI, but the CLI interacts with the engine, which is not what most people want. So the direction of Longhorn has really been to try to just make it a first class, really good Kubernetes solution. So like a storage class. So we don't have, I'm not aware that like the CLI is like specifically like we have, a date or a plan or whatever to deliver kind of a first class CLI. So I can't, I don't have a great answer there, but I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. We are scaling up that team. Longhorn is now kind of, I think we said it was GA, but it's officially supported like through Rancher, and so we have customers and stuff on it, and so we're continuing to kind of expand in that space as the more people are willing to put persistent workloads and they find kind of use cases where Longhorn makes sense. But yeah, not a great answer for that one.
Right, that's okay. All right, so I have the URL. So you should go check out Adrian's channel if you've ever watched any of those Kubernetes videos. And now my Google Auth is popping up. So it's always, whenever you go live, this is what happens. So let me just, this is another channel you should watch. In fact, he just had one 2 days ago. He's like live almost every day. And I think he does it every morning, maybe. I don't know. Like, yeah,
it
seems like that. But if you like this channel, you should definitely check out his channel. I put the link in chat. He's he's talking about all this Rancher stuff and all just cloud native containers, all that stuff. It's great.
Yeah, he's got a site. It's cncn.io. Is his kind of main site of kind of all of his content or what's going on with
nice.
What Adrian's up to. Yeah.
I didn't know about that one.
It's some pretty impressive content. I mean, this is it's like I'm supposed to be like an expert in the space or whatever, but I literally I listen to, it's like I find about projects from Adrian, he's always like bringing it to my knowledge, like, oh, I didn't even know that. I didn't know that one existed. I don't know where he finds all these, to be perfectly honest. So it's like it's totally worthwhile to watch his video. I mean, yeah, good content.
Yeah, he's good stuff. And so sorry if people didn't correlate that. He is in the videos of the Kubernetes training. So if you do that, I'm sorry, of the Rancher training. So if you do the Rancher Academy, you will be seeing his face. Yeah. So, all right. K3s. We already talked about K3s and Turning Pi.
Oh, Turing Pi, they just announced that they just announced the CM4 Compute Module 4. They're going to be releasing that next year. That's a cool platform. I don't have one. I haven't played with them. Alex Ellis is really the one to follow for all of your Raspberry Pi Kubernetes stuff. He's got some great projects like Ketchup. It's K3S Up. That makes it really easy to deploy Kubernetes on these like clusters and stuff. So he's really the one to follow if you want to know about that stuff. So I'm excited for the new one. I'll probably end up buying the new one that's built on the CM4.
This is the repo. Alex Ellis has actually been on the show. I think he was on earlier this year. He's a friend of mine, and all of his stuff is great. And he's always looking for people to help out with the open source. So like if you're wanting to get into open source and actually commit some code, we're still in the month of code for DigitalOcean, by the way, for the hackathon, the Hacktoberfest, I think is what it's called. I've been talking about that all month long. So he's always looking for people to put in some PRs, and all of his projects are really great. He also is really good at making great CLIs for the tools, so making them easy, very similar to a Docker experience.
And he has OpenFaz is his project too, he was a creator of OpenFaz. There's a good community around OpenFaz, and so
he's worked hard at it for years, and I respect the effort because he's got a lot of hustle.
Yes,
it takes a lot of hustle to make open source projects successful.
Not easy to do what he's doing.
Yeah. A question on any good public registry for Helm charts similar to Docker Hub. I do know that there's a discussion around registries being able to store, and they kind of sort of do already, at least Docker has experimented with this, on storing like compose files, Helm charts, other stuff.
Yeah, so that's like the OCI artifacts work that's going on. Because like when you look at a Docker registry, it's really just a content store. It's a content addressable store, and so you can put anything in there. And in fact, you can today. That's a problem that Docker Hub has: is people storing movies on their in their Docker. I
didn't even know that. That's
yeah. Of course, people. If you can store it, people abuse it. What was the actual question? Now I lost my train of thought.
No, that's okay. Public registry for Helm charts.
So there's two of them that I know. So there's some work from like the CNCF. They're doing like that's more of like an aggregator for things. So there's like Artifact Hub that CNCF's doing, but then I can't remember what it's called, but JFrog just put out one where it's like I don't know I wish I could remember, but so JFrog has one where they're aggregating all the content or whatever. But I'll tell you, this is a major problem in my mind, that even if you aggregated all the Helm charts, the majority of the Helm charts out there are not good. And so this is one of the biggest problems with Helm today, is the quality of the charts is very poor. And this is where something at Rancher we're investing a lot in is like, today, like, you have some upstream, let's say Linux software, but then that gets repackaged by a distribution like Ubuntu. And then you can very easily install it in Ubuntu, and they maintain kind of like that package and make sure it's easy and it's integrated with other things. That doesn't really exist today for Helm. And so we're trying to go down that route with Rancher right now of how can we start maintaining a set of Helm charts that are based off of the upstream, but they're well curated in that, like, because like every chart today wants to install Prometheus, for example. But how do we make it so every chart can, like, basically use the Prometheus chart that we also support or whatever? And so that was one of the things that we've started this effort with Rancher 2.5 is starting to figure out how we can curate a set of charts, just so these things easily install. Like, you can install and upgrade them. That's like the biggest things. So that's I think kind of a gap in the ecosystem right now. And I honestly think, like, people's view of what a Kubernetes distribution is today is really like you just get Kubernetes, but there's really no reason that, like, a Kubernetes, like there's room for a distribution the very similar, like, to what Linux distribution is. A Linux distribution is really a kernel and a set of user space packages. So while we kind of say, this situation is a little different where we're saying, well, Kubernetes is the kernel and you can get that anywhere, but you need like a distribution of the user space stuff, all the CNCF projects. So this is an effort we're investing in on the Rancher side of, how do we create a kind of curated set of, like, all the CNCF projects so they just easily install, and you can get charts that you don't have to be an expert to use them.
Yeah. I just now realized I was looking at this while you were talking, that the Helm Hub repo actually redirects over to artifacthub.io, so that is the same thing. And I know about Operator Hub, which is not technically Helm specific, but that's where I end up searching for things sometimes when people are Helm charts eventually lean into a operator style. So I don't know how much of this.
Yeah, Operator Hub is a weird thing. It's kind of hard. I don't know. I've done some other blogs and articles and these interviews about operators and the complexity of that kind of paradigm or marketing term. So I'm not personally a big fan of Operator Hub.
Yeah. I mean, just because it's on there doesn't mean that it's quality, right? Like, that's true of anything on the internet. So, and is there a convenient way to install Rancher on existing K3s hub cluster? Sorry. Is there a convenient way to install Rancher on an existing K3s cluster?
Yeah, so the simplest way to get going with Rancher is I always just throw people to our GitHub page because it has, like, direct links into the docs of what to install. So Rancher, there's two ways to install Rancher. One is you can do a Docker container. That's like a very simple, I have nothing but Docker, but that gives you, like, not a production grade thing, so it's not really the best. The other is install it as a Helm chart, and the Helm chart's fairly straightforward. You need to kind of read the docs, but the docs are quite good that we have out there, because you need to understand the TLS, what options you want to do for TLS. But so if you have a K3s cluster and you want to install Rancher, then it's really just installing that Helm chart. So you're going to download the Helm CLI and then run Helm.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about, is Ketchup, Alex, I feel like Alex has a utility that basically does CLI, like an easy way to deploy Helm charts or something.
Yeah, so there's it started from Ketchup and then it moved into its own project called Arcade.
That's right.
I don't know if Ketchup still does it. I don't really know, but so there's another project called Arcade, which is basically a wrapper around Helm charts, and it makes it really easy to install a bunch of projects. So check out Arcade. That's a great way to install a bunch of apps. Makes
Arcade
it really easy.
with a K. Yeah,
with a K. Yeah,
there we go. I was good. Yeah, I'm glad you remembered that, because that was like it's like an easy CLI for deploying popular things, essentially, that are repeatable and a little bit like, oh, he's got shirts. He's got Arcade shirts.
Yep. Got to promote the swag. Buy some swag.
Got the swag. Yeah, I love the logo because that's exactly what it is. It's like we're nesting. Like we're in the inception. We're 5 layers down. Because that's what a lot of this stuff is abstractions on top of abstractions. A comment, not question. Thank you for providing specific, detailed instructions for air-gapped installs. Us without internet access are often forgotten and ignored. From Tututko.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. That means a lot, because we put a lot of effort into air gap. it's a lot of people do not kind of pay attention to how to address that, and it's not actually that easy. So
Yeah, yeah. Documentation is hard, and you also there's this effect, and I don't know if there's this natural effect that once you've read and written enough documentation, it's hard for you to understand where the gaps are unless you have an easy way for people to constantly point out, like thumbs up, thumbs down buttons like they have in the Docker docs don't really help much without the context of like what is this missing? What are we needing here? And not everybody wants to put in a GitHub issue for docs or whatever. So I think it's always a challenge. Maz asks, what do you think about distroless images? Is it okay to use them as long as Kubernetes SIG release suspended the kube control debug feature? Wow.
Suspended. What does that mean? Because I've been looking forward to the kubectl debug thing getting more leverage, but does that mean there's some hitch in there?
So not maybe not in 120. Maybe that's what they're postponing.
Maybe that's what it is.
So
that for people that don't know what the debug feature is, it's really quite cool. For an existing pod, you can spin up a sidecar to run a pod or a container in that existing pod. And so if you had something like distroless, which has no shell and has no, you can't exec into that. With the debug, you could spin up like a tools container and then run some debugging things there. Yeah. So I think distroless is a great way to go. The maintaining like the CVE scanning and all that stuff is really just kind of a pain. So the less you can have in the container, the better. So I think distroless is a great approach. Scratch if you can do it. If you're doing that, I find basically the only people successful with Scratch images Go developers.
Right.
But yeah.
No, not a lot of C++ developers yet in container land. Yeah. So it's mostly Go people that are doing the static binaries, right? But I love NetShoot. So for those of you thinking about this distroless thing, so distroless is going to help you make your apps in a smaller container image, but it's not for day one. So that's why it's not even taught in my courses yet, because it's typically a maturity thing. Like you've got to get good at just troubleshooting containers with all the stuff in them, including shells, before you take the next step of trying to remove a lot of that unnecessary stuff. Unnecessary meaning that your app doesn't need it. And that's the challenge, is that a lot of this stuff requires you to iterative approach to your learning as well as your deployment. So most of the customers, in fact, none of the customers I've ever worked with over the last 5 years, on day one of deploying things into production, have ever done like a scratch or a distroless image, because they're ops people, they're troubleshooting people. Everyone needs to learn how these things work, and those lean approaches to these things make it even harder. So yeah, the debug command is exciting. The ephemeral image idea. I have this thing. I love Nicholas's NetShoot repo. He's got a great network troubleshooting utility. It's basically just the hodgepodge of all the Linux utilities for troubleshooting distributed systems. I recommend and use that a lot. So that would be my go-to once this debug command works there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're making some excellent points that you should call it. It's like distroless is very advanced. Yeah. I mean, honestly, the vast majority is going to be, Ubuntu or, like Red Hat based containers.
Right. All right. So we've got these questions answered. Boy, we're running over people. Got some great questions today, but there's a lot of them. Darren brings in the questions. When do you plan to fully utilize the new UI in Rancher GA?
Yeah. So so Rancher 2.5. Well, we actually introduced like as a experimental feature in 2.4. 2.5 is so there's like 2.5 right now is kind of a split between we have an old UI and a new UI, and so basically the next release of Rancher is going to complete the new UI. So you should be able to accomplish all of everything in the new UI. But we will not get rid of the old UI probably for another release after that. So that's kind of the plan right now. That new UI that we put in there is very ambitious. There's a lot of work, and we're still refining the user experience, getting it. It's a balance between trying to get a lot of power and flexibility of what Kubernetes provides, but making it easier And so, we're still actively working on a lot of the things there. So the next release you should, which we have about a 6-month cadence of when we do like the major releases. So you're looking at like basically another 6 months before that UI will be done, and then a year before we kind of delete the old one.
Right. Okay. Matthew, another local asks, will KubeVirt be coming to the RKE line?
Well, I mean, so KubeVirt already kind of works with. I don't think there's any problem with running KubeVirt with RKE. We do have some. We are doing some specific things. You'll see some announcements from us around KubeVirt. So we are working on some projects specifically in the KubeVirt space. But those are not really quite ready for prime time. What we're doing there, but that use case of basically running VMs, there's still a good market, or it's kind of like there's a where I see KubeVirt playing is like kind of in the OpenStack space, where OpenStack was trying to kind of go after. KubeVirt is a good replacement for OpenStack, and it's a it could possibly be a replacement even for VMware if you're kind of simplifying your infrastructure.
Right. Yeah. Again, advanced, right? Like that. Yeah. You definitely want to be a well-oiled Kubernetes team before you start layering all this stuff on top, right?
Yeah.
Does Rancher provide enterprise support for K3? Oh, sorry. I was moving on to the next question.
No, I was just gonna say, did my video stream freeze? It's frozen on my browser, so I don't know if it's like just frozen.
It does look like you froze.
General.
It's basically saying you've answered too many questions. Your limit has now been reached.
Yeah.
Well, what you can try is you can try to just refresh your browser, and then I'll let you back in.
Yep. Sure.
Please hold while we bring Darren back into the conversation. Oh, there we go. Ooh. How are we doing now? Oh.
Huh. Well,
it's just laggy. It's just laggy. It's just a little video lag now. I think you're still good. It's just a little quirky. All right. Does Rancher let me see if I can get you a question and see if you can answer this before the internet dies. Does Rancher provide enterprise support for K3S? Curious to know. Oh, I think we're still having bandwidth. All right. Well, we're waiting for hopefully for his browser or something to fix itself. Not sure if it's on my end or his end. Assuming we can bring him back in. I'm going to see if I can answer some of the questions while we're waiting. Can we run KubeVirt? Let's see. Yeah. KubeVirt on top of K3S. Makes sense to use. Third time's a charm.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I don't know. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, you're looking good now. Whatever that did, it might have fixed it. So the question was, Rancher provide enterprise support for K3s? Curious to know.
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's kind of the short answer. So yeah, if you're looking for support for that, yeah, we do support it.
All right, easy answer. Can we run kubevert on top of K3s?
Yeah, it should work. I don't see any problem there. It's still just still Kubernetes as long as you have VTX support on your host. Yeah.
Does it make sense to use K3s for normal servers instead of RKE? If yes, why do I need RKE?
So K3s just kind of optimizes more for smaller scale setups. So there's a lot of people who use K3s basically for everything. So there's really not a lot of downsides except for the fact that it does not have great cloud provider integration. You're going to have to kind of roll that yourself by bringing an out-of-tree cloud provider. So that's where it kind of gets a little more tricky. But at this point, you can find a lot of information on the internet already of like adding a cloud provider to K3s, like DigitalOcean or AWS or something. So it's just the components and stuff we choose. They're great for the user, but sometimes for like, I don't know, like kind of like enterprise needs and whatnot, they want things to be separate. So I'll tell you, we run all of our production Kubernetes instances on K3s because they're very easy to deploy and orchestrate. K3s can actually scale massively far. We scaled it to like 5,000 nodes, whatever like the max Kubernetes is. So you can get pretty far with it.
Yeah. Okay. Can I orchestrate Longhorn with Roo? I'm not sure if they mean Rook.
Oh, Rook. No, I don't think there's any integration there.
Yeah.
No, we haven't really worked on that because Longhorn itself is quite easy to run. It's just basically a Helm chart. And then once it's running, you just interact with it as like a storage class, or there's a GUI for it too. You can just point and click.
So you don't really need Rook then.
I don't know what Rook really provides for us.
Yeah. This is a can of worms, but maybe we can make it quick. Do you have opinions on Cluster API?
Holy crap. It is an important thing. I believe that is the future. I have been actively, it's kind of about every 3 months, I try to use Cluster API and try to figure out what's the strategy for Rancher to move to Cluster API. And it's a slow, painful process, but we are kind of getting there. It's a very tricky thing because the value of the interface of Cluster API is very high level, and it doesn't do much besides just define a cluster. And then all the options are opaque of like what are the options of how to spin up an actual cluster. So then all the options become the provider dependent, and they're specific to the AKS or EKS or whatever. So it all comes down to the maturity of the actual drivers. And the problem with the Cluster API historically, and this has changed, but the problem with it historically is they focused completely on a VM-based model where they were only spinning up VMs and then orchestrating the VMs. So there was no integration with, say, EKS or GKE. And those are the primary ways that I think people should be running Kubernetes in clouds. So there's just always been this practical thing of the actual value you're getting out of the framework, but the idea makes sense. And so we're committed to Cluster API. It is very slow going. It's like, that project's been around for probably 4 years now. And so, it will slowly evolve. Once, VMware is the one who's pushing it very heavily. And so, once VMware started investing in it, it started picking up pace. And because VMware is dedicated to making cluster API their solution. That's they want that to work for their products or whatever. And so so it's like Fleet, for example, has nice integration with cluster API. So if you spin up clusters with cluster API, they can be automatically registered with Fleet. And so so it's this ongoing thing, but it's really messy, really messy.
Right. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of interactions and stuff going on there. Yeah. So a lot of these tools, the goal is to make the complex look simple, but it doesn't mean that it's not complex anymore to build more integrations and things.
And it's kind of like we've been doing this, like provisioning clusters and whatever for so long that there's like, it's kind of like cluster APIs, it's kind of like 2 years behind with what we're doing. So it's like we want to move to a community standard thing, but then the maturity of what we're doing is so far beyond what cluster API is. And so, it's how to balance that. You can always say like, oh, well, you should just contribute everything to that. And it's like, well, no, because there's an idealistic side to the way cluster API works where it's purely declarative and, it doesn't, there's a lot of things where it's like, well, no, once you get into the real world, people actually want to behave slightly different and it's not compatible with it. So it's been a messy thing, but we're committed in trying to figure that out. It's just going to take, I don't see it being feasible for at least another year.
Right. Okay. That was a great question. Another one, Leon's asking me, I think, how does someone work through your courses to begin, or maybe your course, to being ready to deploy their first production app? I know what steps to take, but I'm afraid there are production things I don't know that I don't know. Well, there are the knowns, the known unknowns, and then the unknown unknowns, or however that works. So I don't have an easy answer for you. The biggest, this is always a challenge with training, is that training, the closer you get to real world training, like 200 level and 300 level training, the harder and more niche that training gets to create and take. So most of us are living in the space of giving courses that are sort of introduction courses, maybe a few intermediate courses, just because I don't work on any one company project for deploying containers that's the same. They're all using different CIs. They're all using different server OSs, different ways of creating VMs. They might be cloud or data center. So just to even get you close to that, and it depends on your role, right? Like, are you an operator? Are you just a developer? Are you responsible for everything that relates to a container? Because now that means monitoring, logging, security. Like, there's a ton. That's like 8 courses of things that you'd have to take. It's probably 200 hours of video. So my answer is sorry, I don't know. I don't know if Darren has a
good honest answer.
That's the consulting answer. It was first, and then the honest answer. Sorry, I don't know. Does Rancher provide that was question was already answered. That one was answered. Okay, so someone's like, I just enrolled in the Rancher Labs course, so cool. Big shout out to Adrian. Rancher in Rancher. I don't know if that was a serious question.
No, well, ironically, this is something, it's not quite supported yet, but Rancher and Rancher is actually possible, but Rancher managing Rancher, like Rancher managing Rancher instances is actually going to be an officially supported thing. Not in 2.5, but in the next one. Because there's actually people doing this, that they have some use case where, this is getting very advanced. This is for very large organizations and things where it's like they have a Rancher instance which then manages more Ranchers. But it's crazy. But it's actually weird.
So yes, it's
not as silly as you think. Yeah.
What is Rancher OS? I think we're coming to the end here because we got to roll. But what is Rancher OS? Is it like another Linux flavor? We didn't talk about it.
Yeah, so Rancher OS, that was released very long time ago in container years. And that was it was a very aggressive experimental thing of running absolutely everything in the OS in containers. So every single component is in containers. Over time, that technical aspect of it became not all that interesting. It is what people like Rancher OS for is a very, very simple distribution to just spin up and run a container. It has kind of like it has support for cloud in it. that has kind of like a compose-ish format built into it. So you can just define these are the containers I run. So Ranch OS is a container optimized or oriented Linux distribution. We have K3 OS, which is kind of a more Kubernetes oriented one. There's a question just came in right now of like any updates on K3 OS. Is that so? If you've noticed the news over the last couple months, we were recently acquired by SUSE. That's not quite done yet, so I can't speak to a lot of the, like we're still in the process of that merger, but you can definitely expect once that merger is done, you can expect some updates on what we're doing in the OS space. This is something I'm very excited about, but cannot talk about.
Right. Okay. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So the answer to Kevin is yes, but no.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but later. And we got some new questions coming in, but I'm going to cut it off at this final question of what do you do in your free time except for K3S development?
Yeah. So work is all consuming, like is quite consuming for me. On the other side of the fence, I have 5 children, and so I have no free time. I have no hobbies. I don't do anything except for, family things or work. So yeah, I'm actually, that
okay,
pretty boring in that I basically pretty obsessed with work and then do stuff with my kids.
Yeah. Well, kids are not boring, even on boring days. So I would say that your hobby is family, which
there you go.
In
That's
COVID days
is
yeah. For COVID days, that's a lot of us, right? Is more time with family, more time in the same house.
Maybe spend a little bit too much time with family over the.
Yeah, sometimes. My wife was traveling this week, and I was in the house alone with the puppy for 4 days, and it was the strangest feeling because I haven't had that in almost a year of being alone for 4 days. So I don't know. There's pros, there's cons. I ate poorly. I don't know what, stayed up too late. I don't know what else. I'm not sure what else negative things happened, but yeah, that was the change in my patterns. All right. Well, I know we ran way longer than normal, but I thank you so much for being here. We were killing it on the questions. We had 2,100 playbacks already on YouTube. So we were up to like 150 people concurrently on the channel. So I think you broke the internet on my YouTube channel. So good job on that. That's a new record. I think 150 concurrent is the peak I've ever been at. So people love Rancher and want to hear more about Rancher products, and that's great because a lot of us in the open source and container space have been fans of you guys since the beginning. And a lot of people. I mean, I got locals that work there. We've got just a ton of people that don't say anything really negative about the company or its products. So it's great that you're still doing great work and putting out new tools and always have things to talk about.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to plan next year's event ahead of time. So make sure that there's good releases in around September timeframe in 2021, and then we'll have.
We'll do that.
And you can find out more of us on the I Built the Cloud and the Bret Fisher. These are our little Twitter handles. So go to Twitter. We're both active there. We both answer questions and talk to people on there all the time. We'll be back here next week on YouTube Live. By the way, in a couple of weeks, we've got the 100th episode. Could have had Darren on the 100th episode, but we didn't make all that. The scheduling was challenging, but we're going to have a 100th episode, having some special guests. We're going to have a whole crew of people in here, and we're basically be talking about the state of your DevOps. That's going to be like my tagline. And there's a thing called the State of DevOps report, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to focus on people asking questions about what they're doing in DevOps and what their next steps should be. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time. You'll see more news about that on my Patreon page, which you can find in the links below on YouTube if you're watching YouTube. Otherwise, on Twitch or Periscope, you're out of luck. Like, go back to YouTube. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next week back here on YouTube Live. And thanks. See you soon. I Build the Cloud.
All right. Thanks. It's been fun.
Yeah.
All right.